Welcome back. Uh-oh. Like my audio is not quite picking up. Let me get my mic a little. All right, we should be good. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to yet again another Workflow Wednesday. I am none other than your host, Fusion, over here at JitCAD Cam. This week, we're going to cover how to speed up your lathe setups and put together your lathe tooling, as well as those main and subspindle features, but doing it all parametrically as we've done on the mill. If you guys haven't seen that content, feel free to go ahead and go check it out where we do X6 vice, as well as things like a fifth axis vice with dovetail as well. Let's go ahead and jump into this. A lot of you know at any time, if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to go ahead and throw them in chat. I'll be happy to answer them along the way about what we're showing. So the first and foremost couple of things I need to build my template file. Now, how you build your template file is up to you. And I will tell you guys, I'm going to do a couple of scenarios here. Now, you can mimic these both ways at any time. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to dive in and I'm going to start to create sketches. Now, for those of you that have ever seen my content, I always tell you guys to start with components, but I want to show you the concept behind this. You can always do components later or go back and reconstruct this. So I'm going to start by creating my sketch. And in that sketch, I always like to base everything off of my stock size. For those of you who don't know, we're going to go ahead and create a center line here because we are going to spin this profile. The idea of spinning that profile is going to give us our stock. So at the very highest, easiest level, let's go ahead and give me 4-inch round stock. I'm going to go ahead and make that stock maybe 5 inches. So from here, just to give you guys an idea to start to give a little bit of a shape and a profile to what we have going on, as you can see, that is going to be our stock that we're going to later use in setups, right? So let's go back to that sketch and add some more detail. A few things that you may or may not now need is one, let's say, for example, this is going to be held in like a collet system on the main, and then we're going to possibly do some soft jaws or like a 3-jaw on the sub, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my next reference here. Now, if I'm going to do something with, say, a collet, there's probably a little bit of a taper there. As you can see, I can quickly go in and add dimensions at any time. Let's go ahead and say that's 1 inch. Again, if you have a known angle here, let's go ahead and say 10 inches or 10 degrees. And then the distance at which I'm going to hold on to my stock as well, very important here. Now, a few things to keep in mind when you set this up is you want your stock to basically be the same size as your part. You don't want to do a bar here because when you get into the subspindle side and we're using pressed machining, you can run into some problems. So what might be wiser to your workflow, as I'm going to show you guys right now, is we may want to, instead of doing our distance for that rectangle based in front of the stock or on top of the stock, setting it a little bit behind, again, accommodating for our part off tool, right? So again, we could go ahead and set that more or less stick out distance here. So again, I'm just going to leave it at 150. And now again, kind of have a rinse and repeat. Get a few more dimensions on here real quick. If there was a length to that actual collet, you can see here, I'm plugging that info in. Again, we're going to do another revolve here using that same sketch. And again, we have our center line over here from when we drew everything. And as you guys can see, that is basically going to be that collet holding on to my stock, right? This is where I was saying it's not a big deal. We can turn things into components at any time. Again, the idea here is not to build a perfect assembly, but this is representing what we're going to be seeing at the controller and how we can use it. What you're seeing me do here is I went ahead and highlighted those two items. I'm going to go ahead and create components. And now I like to label my stuff to make it easier. So there's stock and there is the main collet, right? So as you have those two components created, we're going to go ahead and throw a third one in here. This one in this example is going to be the part itself. Now you'll see why here when we start to create our setup. So let's shift gears and create that setup. So I'm going to go in and create my setup. As you guys are going to see me do here, our model for manufacturing case is actually that part component. Now, that is an empty component that we plan to place our part in, and it's where we get that idea of the container method. Now, my fixture, I'm going to go ahead and grab my collet, and then my stock, as you all know, again, we're going to go ahead and go from solid, and we have our stock solid. Now, In my case, I do need to flip my Z, get that out on the front of my stock, of course. I like to rotate things around to get it all neat. Now, something new that some of you may or may not know in these setups now is the reason why it's getting more and more important to set up models for your vice jaws and your chucks is for when we start to talk about machine simulation. We also have things like parameters right now. For example, my chuck reference is based on my fixture, and then you could hypothetically set that as 0. Again, as you're seeing here, we now have a chuck clearance setting, and then we still have fixture clearance well down below. So if you wanted to keep tools a certain distance away. So very simply, we've done now one spindle. We've done our stock. We've made this all so that we can control it at any time, right? So if I jump back to design in this case, we could go ahead and plug in different information. Well, let's go ahead and get everything active. I'm going to go ahead and turn off that sketch, of course, so that we don't have it in our way. And then let's apply a couple of materials, right? Just to make this pretty for everybody at home. I'm going to go ahead and apply some steel from our library for the actual collet. If I can find it here quick enough, there's steel. To say we're going to go with some, what do we got here? 1018. Nothing wrong with some 1018 on the actual collet. And then your material choice for your part, of course, you could set that as well. I prefer to personally change the opacity of the stock. As you're going to see me do here, right click opacity change, and now I get that ghost kind of image. So how is this going to actually work for us when it comes to programming our part? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this. This might be my main setup template. And from that, I can now place my part inside the file, right? So as you guys have seen on our vices for our mills, we activate the proper part. Go ahead and grab this chest piece, drag and drop her in here. And because we've structured everything with components, keep in mind it doesn't have to be perfect at start. So I may want something along the lines of doing a joint in this case, from the center of my part to the base of my stock. Go ahead and flip that around. And then the argument I always get is, do you go off stock front or model front? That's still up to all of you. But I'm going to go ahead and set my part back by 20 thou. Now notice we're overhanging our stock. So we can go ahead and adjust that as well. And if I go up to modify, I have the ability to go to change parameters, of course. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into that sketch. And if you remember, we have an OD and a length, right? We can relabel these at any time. But as you guys are seeing, we may actually want to go to a 3-inch stock. I can't remember what size I drew this part at, but let's go 3.125. And then from our length, we're going to have to saw cut that possibly at 5.125. And again, as you're seeing, is by updating the stock and using that joint where my part sits, everything is moving and transitioning automatically. So again, we could activate our main setup, or we could now jump over to manufacture. And in manufacture, as you can see, everything is defined so that if I had toolpaths already applied here, so again, I'm going to go ahead and grab this 2-axis lathe setup. And what you're noticing is they're now automatically referencing everything that needs to be done based on those profiles and those settings. Now, keep in mind, I do have single groove here. We wouldn't have a single groove there. We could also change some of the parameters here where when we're talking about geometry, is are we going to model back? Are we going to, chuck front, staying away from maybe chuck front by, 50 thou? Again, our idea is at some point we want to go in and part this off, right? So as you're seeing, those parameters and quick setup for the main spindle has made my life a dream, especially for being able to pre-program this part. Now, what does that look like when we start to talk about a subspindle, right? Well, we can kind of rinse and repeat what we've done so far. So if I jump back to design, at some point, I like to always think ahead of myself a little bit, right? So when we go to the sub, I'm probably going to have soft jaws, and those soft jaws are going to have to be controlled with a different diameter. That mean I draw them all up from scratch? Not necessarily, right? So I can actually rinse and repeat a sketch we already have in place. And knowing the information, for example, of one, I need to do a diameter of how far in I want to grab. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a rectangle. And then I like to do a second rectangle because, again, these are going to be basically like step jaws. Pretty common. You guys might cut these yourself, Or if any of you have ever taken any training I've ever done, is I like the double rectangle method. So again, is if I wanted to do an L-shaped jaw or a full square, I could just choose what I'm revolving. Again, we add those dimensions in there, right? So the diameter that which I want to grab onto. So let's set that to 1.5 to start. How far in from the stock front do I want to grab? Now, this is an important one, and I'll show you guys why here in a couple of minutes. And then, of course, how big are those jaws? Whatever your settings are going to be. What is the actual thickness here? Maybe this is 1.25. You've made these yourself or you ordered them online, right? So again, let's go ahead and say this is 5 here. Lastly, we do have one extra dimension. A pro tip for anybody out there is if you have a blue line or a blue dot and you don't know what's going on, as you can see, I can click and drag it and it automatically kind of shows me how it's going to move or why it's going to move, right? So let's go to a 3-inch jaw length. From there, again, we could roll back our timeline when we were doing those revolves. I'm going to go ahead and turn on that sketch, and I'm going to revolve now that profile as well. And this, of course, will be a new body. And as you can see, that is going to be our 3 jaws. We're going to clean this up a little bit more because I'm going to throw another sketch onto the backside. Now, personally, I like to use a rectangle from center. And what this is going to do is give me the ability to set the width of my jaw, let's say 1.5. Now, diameter-wise, you guys could constrain this at any time. Tangent to the circle we've made. And then lastly, I'm using a hotkey E for extrude. Now, with that extrude, I'm going to here's to a intersect, which as you can see is only giving me the intersect of that boundary. Now, I might also want to say I only want to cut body 3, in this case, is my jaw itself, right? So again, as you can see, we now have 1 jaw. We could go ahead and create our pattern for that 1 jaw around a center axis. And then we could do that exponentially amount of times, right? So as you can see, now I have my 3 jaw sub as well as my collet on the main. You can do this on either side, guys. You don't have to do one or the other. You could do both. You could actually create your own configuration here as well, which is something I might visit here one of these days. But as you're seeing, I went ahead and set up everything. Now, I do have my 3 jaws in themselves, so I may want to do a component real quick. And what that component is going to be is we're going to make sure we're at the top level. And this is our sub jaw. And again, I can now take all those bodies, drag and drop them in there, right? So when we talk about components, components are always an organization of everything you want inside that component when we're selecting our setups later. So let's see what that looks like, right? So again, we go back to manufacture. I'm going to do my second setup. Second setup is going to consist of 1, machining the correct part again. Let's go grab our part component. My fixture this time is going to be based on that sub 3 jaw scenario. And of course, as you guys know, we could go ahead and set things like based on our fixture, we want to be at 0. However you plan to set up and control everything, right? Given we are making soft jaws, another thing we may want to do is instead of using an origin based on a stock location, maybe we're using a selected point. And that selected point might be a hard shoulder here. As you guys will see here in a minute, is if I get my 3 jaw out of the way, what I'm using that square edge on that actual part to set my work offset for my sub spindle. Again, our stock automatically generated by our flip. And then if you guys don't have the ability, as you saw here inside of my Fusion, is it automatically turns on and turns off my setup when I jump back and forth and my fixtures based on that setup. And how you could do that is down here at the bottom. You could go ahead and click this little circular yin-yang sign that allows you to synchronize your views. And just like that, we've now got this set up and working, right? Proof of concept is very important, especially if you're a lathe guy and you're doing this, 8, 9 times a day. Let's streamline that workflow. Let's make it as easy as possible. So as you can see, we can go back to design and we can now clean everything up. Or if we wanted to, we can now actually cut those soft jaws, right? So a couple of things I'm going to do is I'm going to start by getting into when we created that sketch, because there is a dimension that I really want to be able to control with a parameter. And that's this guy right here. A little tip for you out there is if you put your mouse there, D15 is the call out. And what D15 is going to actually be called is we're going to set up a user parameter. And this is going to be my grab distance, right? And what that might be is 1.5. We can leave it as is. And as you guys can see, we now have grab distance. Scroll down to dimension 19, I believe it was. Actually, I believe it was 18. And the cool thing is we could actually go in and change these dimensions at any time and see what it updates. So in this case, it was not that dimension. Now, again, I can jump back and forth between the two. I think it was D15. Now, I'm very unsure about this, so I could spend a lot of time here jumping around to figure out where it is, or I could always just go back to that sketch and edit that specific one, right? So again, going to be our grab distance. See how I plug that in and it's self-predicting. Again, we go back to change parameter. And now whatever I set that grab distance, you're going to notice that it is now grabbing in my part automatically said distance. So again, let's go to a 1.5. Actually, let's go 1.75. As you guys are seeing now, we're grabbing on that kind of hub profile of this chess piece. And again, we could now do a combine. I would like to cut this, finalizing our part, right? So again, we can simply go in, cut one item using a separate item. And just like that, if I get some stuff turned off now out of the way, you'll notice how we've cut one of our 3 jaws. Keep in mind, this is always why it's so important for you guys, is when you do certain things in your timeline, affects the outcome of everything else, right? So if I actually did that combine for my pattern at a different time inside of this process, so I'm going to delete my pattern. And what you're going to see, we're back to 1 jaw, and that jaw is now perfectly grabbing onto my part. I just need to do that 3 times. Now, again, I'm going to get rid of this cut and paste because it was an error in my timeline from when we did everything. Again, we could go ahead and fix our combine now. Let's go ahead and edit feature. Again, we're missing our target body. Our target body is now up here. And then from there, we could, of course, now do as we've done. Pattern based on that body, around a center axis, X amount of times. And we are dealing with round parts here, guys. So we do know with round parts, it's obviously everything is just a spun profile. Now, if you guys didn't know, inside of Fusion, you actually do have a spun profile tool as well. So if you're somebody that is doing some more intricate lathe work, there is the ability, if I can remember where it is down here, is to create a spun profile projection of your part. So again, this is something that a lot of people don't realize inside of Fusion, that if you wanted to project a weird shaped profile to create round jaws, completely doable. But again, as you all are seeing here, is we're going to go ahead and make a few more adjustments here because I'm going to grab a little further out. Let's say we actually want a 2-inch diameter with that soft jaw. Again, adjusting my sketch will automatically move my jaws outwards. Because of the way the timeline works, everything else is in place. So where does this play into? Well, the whole reason I wanted to walk you guys through a couple of different scenarios here is when we think about our first setup, right? At some point with a subspindle, we need a subspindle grab, right? Now, where are we going to go to and where are we going to grab into, right? So we have a grab plane, and as you can see, we could go to stock front, right? And then I can create an expression that uses, if you guess, grab distance, right? Again, we're going to go ahead and go grab distance, 1.375. Now, my grab distance has gone positive, which is the wrong direction. So again, we could edit that expression. Again, the idea here for all of you is to get into that mindset that we are setting up things that are going to utilize the settings on the design side to auto-create everything on our actual manual CNC, right? So again, we need to go ahead and edit that one more time because you're in grab distance minus times a -1. And now we have a -1.375. And now we're doing a 1.375 grab in. From that grab, you, of course, would do return, anything of that nature. Again, if you wanted to do a pull out now, you have that ability to populate that all in there. Again, when we flip over, start to machine our backside, of course, our setup is all wacky here. Let's go ahead and edit this here. You need a Z-axis of rotation, of course. Again, didn't define that on the model. For those of you out there wondering, you would always define things off known features like the stock. Getting our part all lined back up for setup 2, maybe in setup 2. Let's go ahead and copy a path down. And we should have, I believe we have axial grooving. Oh, I went ahead and copied that. And we're going to go ahead and change back to horizontal passes. Allow radial and axial grooving, of course. And now we should be getting into our part, which we're actually not getting over that front OD. They need to adjust a few other things outside of that to get that set up. So again, chuck front 0.05. That's more than okay. And let's see what else we got that we could make adjustments on. Not the biggest deal. As you guys can tell, we've done a lot of toolpath videos. But let me know what you think. Does this seem like something that would work out very handy in your shop? Is this something that is outside the box thinking that you never thought would actually come through quite well? So again, that idea is still the same. You can see I can reorganize this, of course, but what I'm looking to do is to make the process simpler for each and every one of you out there. Again, you're not going to be setting this up every time as some people think. It's more the concept that you do it once, set it, and then forget it, right? So that no matter what you do, you could just rinse and system, have tool paths automatically tied to everything. And as you guys are seeing me do here, at any time, I could adjust my stock size and everything else would follow suit that I need to follow and carry down that timeline. And if we over exaggerate things a little bit here, you're seeing that I'm automatically populating the container method of putting a part inside of a container and then controlling everything around that part all in one swift motion. So with that, guys, I'm going to leave you guys back to it. Brian, great to see you out there. You know, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Phil over here at JitCAD Cam. If you guys have any questions about the content you saw today or any comments you want down below, we'll get to them in a timely manner. With that, have a great rest of your day, guys.